Welcome everyone to our session. We're going to have a conversation on resilient ETH infrastructure. My name is Vanessa. I am a product manager at Coinbase. Over the last 4 years, I've been working on accelerating and advancing staking adoption globally. We do this by powering fantastic, delightful staking experiences and by running performant, secure, and of course, resilient infrastructure across many networks, inclusive of Ethereum. What has gotten me sitting here today in this chair speaking to all of you is really a fascination with the question around what is trust? How can I create trust? I began working in crypto 7 years ago, where I worked in the cybersecurity industry as a security engineer at Gemini prior to this, and really just dove right into that question. So really excited here, thrilled to be here with my esteemed set of panelists to really understand and unpack a little bit more of what is NORS, how is it contributing, and why are we very excited about the work that we're doing in this room. So with that, I would like to pass it off to the panelists for a quick intro, a little bit of background as to what are they working on, their role, and why are they here today. Over to David first.
Hi, I'm David Michael. I'm working at Coinbase as a staff blockchain engineer today. I joined the company through acquisition from Bison Trails, and there's quite a bit of Bison Trails folks in the room today. In fact, I see a lot of friendly faces here. One of the things that's really excellent to see is how far this industry has come. I know I'm supposed to talk more about myself, but it's really exciting to see that we've gone from this do this in your basement running PIVX nodes or whatever, maybe you did such a thing, up into a panelist where we're actually talking about real institutional grade security and staking infrastructure. This wasn't the case years ago, but I'll pass it on.
Hey everyone, my name is Anna Ilg. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Figment. I've been in the security industry for 17 years, believe it or not. And I'm super excited to be here and be a part of just the whole topic around security standards and frameworks in our industry. That's one of the reasons why I decided to pivot from various heavily regulated environments in the past to this new industry with not much published out there. So excited to be here.
Hey guys, I'm Rob. I'm currently a partner at Laminated Labs, which is primarily a consultancy that's working with early stage startups, kind of being like a fractional platform, security, compliance type of team. We're also an independent validator on a few bespoke networks, just trying to put our skills to work. Why you might be wondering why you should give a shit about what I say with that intro, but prior to doing all that, I was one of the earliest engineers at a little outfit called Bison Trails, and I ran infrastructure for an entity called Coinbase Cloud for 3 years. So tons of blockchain infrastructure at scale probably started at my fingertips. So.
Awesome. Hey everyone, I'm Chris Battenfield. I run strategy at DV Labs. We're working on building distributed validators, or you might know as DVT. Long time ago, before Ethereum had staking, I also helped contribute to the Ethereum Foundation's effort to build the first staking launchpad. That's still live today on launchpad.ethereum.org. Today we have a new launchpad, the DV launchpad, that's on launchpad.opal.org, where operators can come in and create distributed validators for a more resilient infrastructure.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. So let's begin with the basics here, and this might have some overlap with some of the last few panels we've heard. But first, let's just address the question, why should stakers and operators prioritize resilient infrastructure, period? And for that, turn it over to David to really break down what are the most significant risks specific to Ethereum that stakers should adhere to.
Thanks. I think about resilient infrastructure, and the first thing that comes to mind is, do we have another choice? I mean, this is what we do. There's no other way than to have stable, decentralized networks if we want this thing to continue to work over time. So having something like NORS in place helps us give us a metric for this type of resilient infrastructure, which I hope we've been doing all along, but this sort of gives us a little bit of professionality, auditing at that layer. There's been a lot said about slashing, and I think that really is the core. I mean, you come down to it, what are the biggest risks that you have? It is slashing. And it's what leads to slashing. It's double signing, it's equivocation, it's uptime, loss of rewards. This sort of thing is really the root of all of the risk that people have talked about here. There's some other risks from an infrastructure standpoint that I've seen recently, which is complexity risk. We now have sort of the proposer-builder separation. We also have block futures coming in with pre-commits. These sorts of things provide complexity at levels that we have not dealt with in prior networks. And today we have, it's beginning to escalate. So ultimately that does come back to slashing if you do it wrong. But there's this sort of push towards increased rewards from different networks and different ways to increase your rewards, which leads us to take increased risks on things like collateralized networks, which maybe we can talk about later.
Great, let's move forward here. And Chris, I have a question for you now. Building upon what David Michael just outlined, and thinking about the overall health of Ethereum at large, what are some innovations or design approaches that are essential for node operators to pay attention to today to ensure that they do not compromise some of those key tenets of decentralization, making sure that slashing risks is kept minimal for their participants?
Yeah, so I think in a traditional staking operator setup, they would run or create a validator off of a single private key, and they would likely run that on a single machine if they're keeping it simple, or potentially on a more advanced setup, maybe with Kubernetes, so that they have high uptime, but they run the risk of potentially double signing and incurring a slashing event. So now with distributed validators, essentially what you're able to do is take that private key and distribute that, essentially splitting the key into many key shares, and be able to run that validator on many machines in a distributed fashion. Additionally, you could also use many entities to run that same operator. So we call these clusters, and these can be ran at scale. So you can have thousands of validators within a cluster, and have some of the largest staking entities be sharing the duties of that validator together as a part of that cluster. So, and what this allows is if one of them were to go down or one of them were to be compromised, with a threshold of that group, they can still perform the duties of the validator and wouldn't incur any sort of key compromise risk because there's no single place where the private key exists. It's split in two pieces. So it may be a more practical setup that might look like 4 operators create a cluster. You can imagine like some of the larger staking operators here today. Essentially, they could be a part of NORS, which I think is a really nice addition to this, because you can follow the standards of NORS and then add distributed validators as a supplement on top of this and create a cluster to be ran at scale. Yeah, and again, as I mentioned, key compromise risk goes down, validator uptime stays up. So this is kind of what we're working on here at Obel.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think just to add to that, we really want to think about, everything falling together, it's like pieces of a puzzle, really just benefiting the end user, which is the staker, which is going to be all summing up together from all the efforts that we're doing here. Diving into NORS, introducing NORS into this paradigm, I'd love to turn it over to Rob. And Rob, if you could just share a few examples on the impact that you see NORS can have on existing and new operators, and how you really see them able to use NORS to identify best practices and adhere to best practices. That would be great. Just if you could just speak a little to that.
I think I'm going to approach it from like the smaller outfit perspective, because that's where I kind of like to live in. I think one of the things when we were building NORS that we tried to account for was that we didn't want it to be exclusionary to earlier stage players or smaller operators in the space. And I think it's actually there's a couple of things. This is going to be a multifaceted answer, so bear with me here. But as a smaller operator who's, say, looking at compliance, and when I talk about compliance, to me, compliance is a spectrum. And what I mean by that is kind of what our auditor friends said before about risk mitigation. There are many different ways to mitigate risk, and a lot of ways might make sense for an institutional player. They might make a bunch of different ways might make sense for a smaller player. NORS kind of gives you I would say, like, you know, if it's a spectrum, it gives you like a targeted range to kind of like fit into, and like you can ultimately, I think for an earlier stage company, more than some of you large guys in the room, it's a sales tool, right? If you can attest to NORS, you can say, I am like as competitive as you know, it's likely table stakes for Figment or table stakes for Blockdaemon, achieving NORS compliance. But as a earlier outfit, you can put yourself ahead of the game, and NORS probably puts you on a path to achieving SOC faster, if you know overall compliance is your goal, versus you being you know, going for SOC and then adopting NORS, etc. Kind of back to like the spectrum stuff, like, you know, I think NORS provides like this kind of framework that you can look at as a roadmap for not just a smaller player, any player, but like as a smaller player, you can be like, I'm going to do the things that fit into this framework, you know, for my operator infrastructure. And if you do that, like you're just like, it's like similar to like AWS well architected or like any other thing. It's just like you're adopting best practices as an industry, and like you're making yourself competitive. And so like before this existed, it was like a wild west. And I was like, a quick anecdote, so I stopped myself from talking too much. Like in the early days of building, one of the biggest challenges without something like this was like convincing our customers that it was okay for us to be down, versus like the traditional paradigm of like, hey, why don't you guys have 7 nines, right? And it's like, no, like none of that makes sense in crypto. It's a totally different paradigm. We would rather be down for hours than risk slashing and losing 10 to 100 times the funds than we would just being down a little bit. And so like a framework like NORS kind of codifies that stuff and gives you tools to communicate that to your customers, your partners, the industry at large, etc.
Fantastic. And I love the idea of how you frame it as a roadmap. It is something that any entrant can graduate through, can set their sights to, and fundamentally, you know, make sure that they're hitting those marks in order to be considered world-class. Anna, question for you. Specifically, how do you see the NORS certificates impacting the staking landscape at large, and especially through the lens of adding trust to the stakers are participating?
Yeah, definitely. So when I think of trust, I think of kind of 2 different ways to manage security. One is the not great way, which is like ad hoc security. That's a situation that, you know, a lot of us are familiar with. Companies kind of wait until something happens, right? That's very high risk way of managing security. We shouldn't be going that way. Companies still do for reasons, maybe resource, money, constraints, things like that. That obviously doesn't build trust, because normally an event happens and then it's like everybody rushed to go and have some kind of security framework. The other side of the house is proactive security, right? That's the direction that basically generates trust. What NORS does is it supports the proactive security measures that companies should be following. Companies specifically, like institutional companies, traditional finance companies, right? That's the direction that they're accustomed to work with. So they have, a lot of them have auditing firms and groups, and they specialize in all sorts of frameworks or specific frameworks to them. What NORS provides is like that additional layer of guidance that needs to be done. I think we touched a lot on various topics such as awareness, you know, training, making sure that institutions understand the right risk. Because one of my most like pet peeves in security, and I've been doing it for a long time, is check the box security. I don't believe in it, and this is like a time and a space where we can actually say, go down the list and say, do these requirements matter? Do they actually add value? And to your point, does it make sense, right? And what we're doing and what we're building. I'd rather be down, right, than suffer a slashing risk. So, you know, kind of circling back to your question, it's all about trust, but not just like educating, but understanding the risk and then providing that guidance that's needed out there for like traditional companies that only understand traditional security. And this is our opportunity to change that.
It's so exciting. And Anna, I love that you mentioned this deviation from check the box type of security. Just as a follow-up to what you've said, how do you see us able to achieve that continuously after the first iteration of NORS? How can we always be refreshing, rehydrating this thought and making sure no part of the business is stale?
I think the group that started NORS really needs to continue participating and or bringing in other people to participate, because as soon as you stop, right, trying to make improvements or iterations or whatever, it's going to unfortunately just die. So whether there's a committee or a group that continuously focuses on the risks and the requirements to ensure that they tie together, I think that's key.
Fantastic. I see some nods from David, Rob, Chris. Anything to add on that point?
Yeah, I actually want to riff on something that Rob was saying, is that we're talking a lot here about enfranchising institutions and making folks feel safe. The roadmap spoke a lot to me. Like, as a small operator at one time, working for a company that's one of the largest operators on Ethereum, the thing that's so amazing is that there's room for everyone in this industry. Providing that roadmap lets us all participate sort of at similar levels. That doesn't exist in traditional finance at all. There's no way that I can run parts of the NASDAQ in my basement, but I can run parts of the Ethereum network in my basement. Yep. So I think having a roadmap that the big boys play with is really interesting to me. So I think the crossover between providing assurances to larger institutions for risk mitigation also informs the smaller players about what risks are manageable. You guys both mentioned like downtime's okay in some circumstances. It's much better than equivocation. This is not something that folks know like right out of the bat if you're messing around with your boxes at home. But like I said, making sure that that is open to everybody as we develop this is really interesting.
As we establish this framework, I'd love to just do a quick fire round of questions for our panelists here and just look forward to the next 2-3 years, which of course is difficult to do in our industry. Everything moves so fast, but there's also the other side of the coin, which is there's endless possibilities there. So, beginning with you, Chris, let us know your thoughts. 2-3 years from now, what is your dream state of Ethereum Validator operations? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think that what's important for Ethereum is that we have a diverse set of validators, and that's diverse in many different ways. That's geographically, that's probably also large entities, but maybe small entities as well, to ensure that there's censorship resistance within the network. And I think, adding on to what Rob was saying about this path for these like smaller entities to get started within NORS and kind of build towards that, one of the things that we've seen within Obel clusters are these small operators actually pairing with some of the larger operators in the space. And today, within Lido's simple DBT module, these clusters outperforming some of the largest operators in the space, like top 5 operators in the space. So, and they're performing the duties of the validators together, maybe in someone's home and maybe in like some massive cloud or bare metal. So I think what I'd love to see is a continuation of NORS, and also allowing for like some of the smaller operators in the space to step into that path that Rob mentioned, and be running the validators together to have a very resilient network of diverse validators.
Wonderful.
It feels like a cop-out answer, but automation. And in the sense of like, number one, someone in this room definitely needs to write a check to someone to build the Vanta of NORS. It doesn't have to be me. Please don't write me a check. But like that's going to happen. And more specifically though, like with tech like DBT and all of these like automations for things that were very hard for us to do in the Ethereum space, like 3 to 4 years ago, it's a lot easier. And like automating attestation of like compliance, automating your, the risk mitigations that all of us are either have worked on, are currently working on, or will work on as a part of NORS, like automating all the different aspects of that to make it extremely easy to turn up a validator that's compliant, distributed, secure. Like I think a lot of us has built platforms that have done that to various levels over the years, but I think the game continues to change, and so like further automation is necessary.
Right. Love automation, by the way. That's always a thing, like when we talk about security, we want to make sure that we're promoting efficiency as well. That's not always the case. But specifically to your question, I mean, given that I focus a lot on security, obviously I want to continue that across all components, whether it's, and it's not just node operation, but there's several other pieces to this, right, that we haven't touched on yet, but will. And I think it's just a matter of just ensuring that ETH's, the health of ETH stays strong, and that all the other components and domains are considered as we progress and mature.
Fantastic. David?
So I think I might have hinted at this, but the thing I'm fairly excited about in the next couple of years is collateralized networks. So being able to run decentralized networks without having to bootstrap your own layer 1 or layer 2 for that matter. This is an area that's sort of like very explosive. I also think it's a weapon of mass destruction if it's done wrong. We've got restaking networks like EigenLayer, some of the folks are in the house today, and we've got Symbiotic. There's others. The thing about it though is that I do think it all comes back to Ethereum's base layer for security. I'm curious how NORS is going to deal with collateralized networks in the future. I know there's not a direct relationship there, but it is a real relationship, especially if you have sort of locked up stake or collateral moving through contracts before they actually come back to the depositor. It adds another layer of risk, which we haven't really talked about today, but it's a developing field.
Yeah, fantastic. Those are all my primary questions there, so I'm happy to open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions for our panelists.
So how do you feel about what three-sided technology is about? At midday, that versus mentioned for keeping the key on validator itself, accepting delta. So that's what sensor.
I feel pretty good about it. Maybe Rob, you got it?
You mean like remote signers, or you mean like the strategy there, like?
Yeah, the strategy, the choice for a node operator between keeping the key secure on the validator or having a machine that actually handles the distribution in case it's done.
Yeah, I think right now there's a lot more choices than there were, say, 2-3 years ago. I still think there's many facets of that. There's still things that I think don't make that automated enough while guaranteeing safety, so that like, I'm not going to say paper processes, but things that are semi-automated are still the go-to, I would say. I think that landscape is changing. I think like with any remote signing infrastructure, any significantly complicated remote signing infrastructure, like it's really hard to think about, but like
risk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're shifting risk into like a whole new world, and I think it's whether or not you, as a group, like whomever's building this, have the maturity to like enter into that and understand the risk that you're shifting. But I think like technology is improving, like things like. Even outside of Ethereum, like things like Horcrux and like all of these other things, like people were just like slapping stuff together to do that now, and now there's all sorts of open source projects and things to do, and it's an expectation. Even when you launch a new network, the existing validator set coming in is like, hey, how do we do distributed signing, right? Like it's the first thing, and most new networks don't have this, but like it's top of mind for everyone, so I think that like 0 to 1 stuff will happen a lot quicker. But I think the risk there is like still the hardest thing to grapple with. I don't know if I answered your question, but tried.
Answered along the same line. Thank you.
We are at time, unfortunately. Clearly so much more to unpack. Please find us after this. Cannot wait for NORS Conference number 2. And I think I speak for all when I say thank you to our wonderful panelists, and thank you to Liquid Collective for arranging this meeting of minds and bringing us all together to build a more resilient Ethereum of tomorrow. Thank you.